Hi guys, it's Mr. Lawrence. So, as I mentioned yesterday, today's going to be the last day where we're going to get new material. So up until now, between Easter break, the school would like us to do some review things, going over some of the skills that we've done throughout the year. So today we're going to finish up Unit 6 and Westward expansion to kind of finish that story so we don't kind of leave it hanging. And then we will do some review between now and Easter break, and then we'll pick up after that, hopefully maybe back at school or either continue online with the new material. So yesterday, we saw the North and South having this collision course, having this agitation, and you see both sides getting mad. You see the South getting mad at something called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is this book, which they really hate because they think it exposes the brutal reality of slave life. And they say it's all a lie, but they know some of it's partly true and that it's really resonating amongst people in the North. People in the North are really ticked off about this Dred Scott decision where the Supreme Court basically said that slaves aren't people, they're not citizens with any rights. And then this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which is, you can see here, shoving down the country with more slave states. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act set up this situation where there would be violence in the future, because it said that in this new territory of Kansas, the people there can vote on whether they're going to be a free state or slave state. Well, the natural thing is people are going to go try to move out there and kind of by force say, hey, we're for slavery. Oh, hey, we're against slavery. So that's what we're getting at today. And the leader that kind of emerges here of the anti-slavery, more violent forces, somebody that actually wants to do something specific right now, is a guy by the name of John Brown. And John Brown was friends with people like William Lloyd Garrison. He was friends with people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. But he wanted to take it a step further. He very much believed that only violent rebellion would end slavery. He was done with the talking stages. He was done with speeches. He was done with writings. After that guy Elijah Lovejoy had died, remember him we had shown earlier, he had a printing press and he was kind of shot by a mob outside of his warehouse. After the incident with Lovejoy, John Brown gets up in his church and he raises his hand to God and he says, I dedicate my life from this point forward to the absolute destruction of slavery. And he very much believes it's a religious quest, and he sees himself as an Old Testament figure. He gets this long beard to kind of look like Moses he wanted, because he wanted to dole out this punishment to people that he thought were for slavery. And he didn't really care how bloody or brutal it got. He was that adamant about his beliefs. And what Brown does is Brown is going to assemble a group of people that are like-minded. Some of them are ex-slaves, and a lot of them are his family members, so a lot of them are his sons. But they are going to round up weapons, round up guns, round up ammunition, round up pikes, round up knives, round up swords to head out towards Kansas. Now, before I show you that, I do want to show you Brown's kind of headquarters. So this is John Brown's farm. This is in North Elba, New York, near Lake Placid. I went there a couple years ago, and you can kind of see he lived this very rural, this very simple lifestyle. He did not really believe in earthly possessions that much. He just was very, down to nature and was totally focused on his one goal here. And you can see the gate of his house, and then you can also see his grave from the 1800s, so it's kind of hard to make it out entirely. So what Brown is going to do is, Brown, remember, he's living in New York. He's going to go all the way out to Kansas, and he's going to take some of his folks there. And Kansas gets this nickname called Bleeding Kansas. And what happens is you have the two rival groups. You have the pro-slavery group called the Ruffians, the anti-slavery group called the Jayhawks, or the Free Soilers, sometimes they were called, and they both were trying to rig their vote in their favor. They were both trying to intimidate the other side, and they set up opposite camps. They had their own towns, they had their own constitutions, they had their own laws. And then at one point, one of the anti-slavery towns, a town called Lawrence, actually, was sacked. So they went and they burned Lawrence to the ground. And Brown is there, and he's really ticked off by this. So he vows revenge. And his revenge is very swift and maybe a little bit over the top. So what Brown does is he takes his men down into a ravine, and they hide there at night. And on the night of May 24th, 1856, he then goes from house to house to a couple families that he knows have pro-slavery men leaders. And in the first house, the Doyle house, they grab out the three oldest men, the dad and the two oldest boys. The mom actually has to basically beg for them to spare the younger boy. And they take him out of the house, they drag him in the middle of the night, and they stab them to death with swords and with knives. They do the same thing at a fourth house, they take a guy there. They do the same thing at a fifth house, they do the same thing with a guy there. So that's what's called this Pottawatomie Creek Massacre. And there's retaliation on both sides. There's another battle at Osawatomie, which some of Brown's people are going to be killed. One of his sons is going to be killed out there. So there's blood on all sides of this. So that's where Brown kind of almost makes his reputation as someone who is willing to go to the full extreme for what he's saying here. And then over the next 2 or 3 years, Brown is going to develop this master plan, or what he thinks. He's going to set off this one spree of rebellion that he thinks will be the powder keg that explodes this entire thing, and that will have this collision course between the North and South, which is inevitable. He says this is going to happen. We're going to have a civil war. There's going to be a race war between whites and blacks, North and South. Let's just get to it. That's his kind of attitude. And in fact, he goes to people like Frederick Douglass, and Douglass is like, yo, buddy, you are taking this too far. I think you're going to get yourself killed. I think you're going to get your family killed. I think you're going to set our cause back. Our cause should be about righteousness, and should be about peace, and should be about nonviolence, and should try to persuade the politicians. And Brown's like, the time for persuasion's done. Nobody's listening to us anymore. We might as well take it into our own hands. So what Brown decides to do is to focus his attention on this town called Harpers Ferry. And this is going to be our last note for the unit, and it's the perfect ending point. Harpers Ferry is now in West Virginia. It was actually called Virginia back then. And Harpers Ferry sits at this point jutting out between two rivers, the Shenandoah River to the south and the Potomac River to the north, and then it kind of forms this fork here where the Potomac then merges. So you have Maryland up top, you have Virginia down below, and now this is called West Virginia over here. And back in 1859, this is where the Union Army had stored a lot of their weapons. They have an armory, they have an arsenal, they have a rifle works. So they have 3 facilities that safeguard and store a lot of the weapons for the military. And Brown's idea is to go to Harpers Ferry. It's not actually defended with that many men. Take it over and then distribute those weapons to slaves, go to different plantations throughout the area, kill the white masters, hand the weapons to their former slaves, and then it'll spread like wildfire. So go from plantation to plantation and try to create this massive slave uprising, and now they'll have weapons to do it. He has this group called the Secret Six, of people from upstate New York and Canada that help fund him and give him money. And then eventually he's going to get 22 people that are going to go with him. And 16 of them are white, 6 of them are black, and only 5 of them are actually going to end up surviving this. 17 of them will end up dying, either in the battle or be executed afterwards. Because for all of his passion, for all of his zeal, he did make some mistakes. He kept insisting that there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of people to join us. Well, that just never happened. They get to Harper's Ferry, and they do take these facilities, but there's only 22 of them, so there's not that many to spread out. And then he wants to go send out towards some of the plantations to get hostages. So they have to take some of their men out in the fields to go get some white hostages, some rich white hostages, to bring into the city. And while that's taking place, obviously the people of Harper's Ferry are going to ask for help. They're going to telegraph for help. And pretty soon, the military is going to come to town. And the military is actually going to come to town under the direction of a guy named Robert E. Lee, who we'll learn about during the Civil War. And the military is going to corner him. And he basically gets cornered at the end in this small fire engine house. They have to give up the armory, they have to give up the arsenal, and the final defenders get stuck in this fire engine house. Some of them get shot in the street. Some of them get shot trying to cross the river. There's a couple of them, 3 of them, that end up getting shot trying to cross the river. One of them's body actually stays in the river, and they use it for target practice for the next couple days. Some of the white citizens, really nasty. And Brown and some of his sons here are stuck in the firehouse. The Marines finally bust through the barricades. They stab a bunch of them. Brown's wounded and carried out. They then put Brown on trial, and Brown's trial becomes kind of like the scene of the century. He's so injured and he's so wounded and he's so kind of old and haggard from this. He's basically in the mattress for most of this trial in Charlestown, Virginia. And he is, put up for treason. They say, you tried to attack the United States military, so that's treason. You should suffer death. And he's able to get a lot of northern journalists and a lot of northern newspaper writers to feel for his cause, and he's able to get his message out there. Even though he knows he's going to die, he uses this attention here to kind of make a case that he's a martyr. He's like this religious figure that he's really trying to play up, that is dying for this cause. So he, on December 2nd, 1859, along with some of his other followers, goes to their death by hanging. They even make a song afterwards, John Brown's Body, which is eventually to the same tune of we would now know as Battle Hymn of the Republic, which we had heard of before in class. I'm not going to sing it to you because it would be pretty horrific. But Brown finally here, he puts a harsh reality on the fact that it is going to be difficult to keep this country together. You have people on both sides that are extremely hell-bent on seeing this to a final determination, that this can't stay half slave, half free forever, in the words of Abraham Lincoln in a famous speech which he gives called House Divided, that it can't be half and half, it's got to be all one or all the other. And that is what's going to eventually lead to a civil war in Unit 7. So that's the end here of Unit 6. You can see a lot of the events we've covered with expansion and abolition leading up to this movement. So this is the end of some of the new material. Next week we will have some review, and then after spring break we'll make a determination about what's coming after that. So thank you and have a good day.